So you've probably heard of the concepts of transferring your consciousness and, of course, uploading your consciousness into a machine that are common in science fiction. But when people talk about actually trying to do these things in real life, it's generally accepted that you're simply just mimicking all of your memories and personality, or even mimicking your entire brain. But your soul, or in other words, your subjective experience, is going to be stuck in your actual body until you die. But what many people don't realize is there's a concept of brain fusion, which hasn't really been explored in science fiction, and I think this could be a really interesting topic. Now, as a basis for this, or a bit of evidence, we have a lot of these freak scenarios or medical procedures that have shown us some really interesting things about the brain. So first off, we have the Tatiana and Krista. So these are conjoined twins, and what they have is that their brains are connected partially so that they can share taste, sight, feelings, thoughts, and this is all communicating through the brainstem. There's another case of conjoined twins, Abby and Aaron, and these were two babies where they were actually conjoined in the prefrontal cortex. So this is actually the part of the brain that controls your sense of self and potentially your consciousness, although that is also debated, and we'll get into that later. We also have an instance of when half of a person's brain is removed. And this is really interesting because you can see in the video there that the people are usually not very affected by this procedure, and their consciousness, at least according to what they say, is unchanged. Now, this goes into the split brain procedures, or what's called the corpus callosum. And so these patients actually keep both of their brain hemispheres intact, but the connection between the two is severed. So there are some famous experiments by Michael Gonzanaga, I believe, and he has some really interesting results. So in the experiment you're seeing now, only one of the visual hemispheres is able to see the word phone. When he's asked what he's seen, he says he hasn't seen anything. But then when he's asked to draw it with his left hand is able to draw a phone. And it's interesting because his consciousness, at least the one that we're hearing, doesn't know what he's drawing until after he's drawn it a few times. In another experiment, he showed a toad on one hemisphere, and then he showed a stool on the other side of the hemisphere. Now, his left hand is able to easily draw the toad, but then it's only able to draw the stool once his voice tells him that he saw a stool. So in other words, the consciousnesses are completely separate. However, when you ask the person in daily life if they have a unified experience, they say they do and that nothing has changed. The question is if there's a separate right brain consciousness that we're not able to hear, or instead if the right brain is just an NPC or has no subjective experience. Now, this brings us to this new interesting thought experiment that I've come up with, which is the idea of brain fusion. So in this scenario, you'll have an adult brain and you'd fuse it with either an artificially created brain that was created in a lab or fused with a baby's brain, for example. And the idea is that you would fuse the brains at the prefrontal cortex where the sense of self is located, and then eventually the sense of self would become one and both bodies would say that they are having the same consciousness. Now, the question is, after the two brains are separated once again, which body would the consciousness wake up in? Of course, regardless of what happened, both bodies would say that they are still experiencing consciousness and that they are still the original person. However, the subjective experience or the soul could be changed with its memories changed as well. Okay, so remember, everything having to do with consciousness and souls is completely subjective, so there's no way to prove any of that stuff. But we're just going to get right into the thought experiment and go through some options that it could be, even though we'll never actually know. Unless you could think of some way to prove it, let me know in the comments. Okay, so in this scenario, we're assuming that both of these brains start out with a soul, right? Which is probably the most rational thing to think. Now, if you think that consciousness and the soul is just a property of neurons, then basically what that means is that the original souls are going to stay in the original bodies. They'll just stay connected to their original neurons, okay? However, if you think consciousness is caused by electricity or information processing or intelligence, then it's possible that the souls could be split or they could be sort of mixed up after this fusion. And after that one singular consciousness gets split into two brains, then it necessarily has to be split into two or more different souls. Okay, those other options, maybe one soul could take over the entire brain of the other person, or maybe both souls could move to one brain, and then the original brain would just be an NPC. Entirely possible. Okay, now here's an option that I actually really like, and the idea here is that this is assuming that we don't have free will, so that basically your body and your mind can have multiple different souls that are already in it right now. Okay, and so in this case, basically by definition, since your soul is just one experience, it can't be split. Otherwise, it would be two different souls. So basically, it would just be a toss-up of which brain you are going to be going into. But there's also going to be tons of other souls potentially that are going to be staying in your old brain or maybe moving brains. So I think this is really trippy. And I think I actually like this one the best. Now, of course, it's entirely possible, at least the two people in the experiment, neither of them have a soul. Or, of course, it's possible that nobody has a soul and everyone is just pretending like they have a subjective experience. Maybe I'm doing that right now. But yeah, so it's entirely possible nobody has souls. Let me know if you think option 8 is true in the comments. Okay, now this is assuming instead of using like a baby brain, you'd be using like a artificially created brain, like a chunk of brain tissue that has just grown in a lab or something. So some people would say, it didn't go through the normal stages of life, so it doesn't have a soul. It never got sparked with consciousness. So in this case, maybe you could have your soul split, just like before, or maybe you could just move bodies with your soul. Or, of course, maybe you could create a soul by passing it along to this chunk of brain cells. Okay, and then now we're getting into computers. So, like I said before, if you're just simulating your brain into another computer, there's no chance that your soul could actually go into a computer. But if you're connecting to a soul with your brain, like, say, Neuralink or some sort of implanted device, then because you're sharing an electrical circuit in a way, I think it's possible that your experience could transfer into the computer so that you maybe start feeling more like a computer than a person. Then potentially, once your original brain is turned off or disconnected, then maybe you just still feel like a computer. It's entirely possible. Again, this is assuming that neurons are not what's causing consciousness. Okay, another option is the computer already has a soul. It's already doing information processing, or it already has intelligence. I like this one too. I don't think this is true right now, at least. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure to let me know which one of those options you think is the most plausible. And I just wanted to get that thought experiment out there, and maybe it'll end up in some weird dystopian sci-fi someday. So, yeah, anyway, have a good day.